we're not really testing to evaluate performance as much as we are about helping kids get better if they need to. Is that right?
Yes. And I would say every child can and deserves to grow every year. And it doesn't matter where their results are. If my child is doing really well in school, they deserve to learn and grow too at school, right? And so it gives us insights of where might we be able to push them forward and propel their learning forward even more. Or if there is a struggle spot, how can we build those skills so that they aren't struggling as much and can improve and do better over time?
Hello and welcome to Mindshift, a PLCS Empowerment Collective podcast. My name is Christopher and I am one of your hosts today.
And I'm Deb. I'm your other co-host. Welcome, everyone.
And Deb, today we're talking about testing and all the testing that happens at school and what that means for your family, what that means for your students, and what that looks like. And I have to say, I don't have a lot of context for testing beyond what I experienced as a classroom teacher because my son's only 5. So we haven't gotten into that world of testing yet.
So what was your experience as a classroom teacher?
Well, as a classroom teacher, I taught reading intervention. And so we did a lot of testing in reading intervention, including some of the tests that we use here. We use the MAP Growth Assessment, which I feel like we'll probably talk about today. And then we also did some Lexile measures and a reading inventory, scholastic reading inventory, which I feel like has been around for decades and people have probably heard about that. But using those tests in my classroom as a teacher was really important to me to help identify where some learning gaps existed in my students for reading intervention. But sometimes I will say, sometimes it was hard for students to understand the importance of those tests. And so I always thought it was helpful to have conversations with my students about the tests and the results of those tests afterwards so they better understood why we were taking those tests and what we were doing with the results.
So now, working in a school district or having worked in a school district, there's so much more that I've learned about testing that I'm really excited to hear from our guest so she can tell us a little bit more about it. So,
All
Angie,
right.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Angie Wright. I am currently the Director of Assessment at Papillion Vista Community Schools, and I am also a parent, and I have 2 nieces and a nephew who have gone almost all the way through school, and I have supported their mom in understanding testing from her perspective and their perspective.
And I think sometimes the outside perspective is like, oh, you're giving another test and another test and another test, and it feels like death by 1,000 tests. But help our audience understand your perspective on this, where testing takes on a more meaningful role.
So, and I agree. I think anytime that I hear we're over testing, I always ask the question, how are we using the information that we get? And if we're not using the information that we get, we probably need to evaluate our decisions. Some of those decisions are within our hands and some of them aren't. We can't control all of them. So some of the testing, like state testing, it's required by law that we do it. And so then we as a district and as teachers and as administrators have to figure out how can we best use that information to inform our processes. And sometimes that's to the individual student level. And sometimes it's a bigger picture. Sometimes we're looking at assessment data and saying, how is our curriculum performing? Are we meeting kids where they are? Are kids learning at the levels that we want them to be able to learn at so they can be successful in the long run? And when we find data that tells us it's not working or that it is working, then we either know we're headed in the right direction or we need to do a little bit more digging and find some more information to figure out what might we need to change so that we can better serve kids on a big picture and then individually as well.
So, Angie, for parents who might be new to testing or new to our district, would you just lay out for them the different tests that we require our students to take?
Sure. So in elementary school, starting in kindergarten, all of our students take MAP Growth. Christopher mentioned that one earlier. So all of our students, kindergarten through 9th grade, actually take MAP Growth. in both reading and in math. And then in addition, in the reading side for our youngest learners, kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, they take a test called MAP Reading Fluency. And the reason there are two reading tests, MAP Growth tells us about their listening comprehension at that K1-2 level. And MAP Reading Fluency gives us information about them. Do they know their letters? Do they know their letter sound correspondences? Can they sound words out? What do they sound like when they read? So it gives us a more comprehensive picture of them as readers. So that's the MAP testing, and that takes place at least 2 times per year. And then students take NSCAS, which is our state test, and that's 3rd through 8th and 11th graders. NSCAS is it's math and reading, and then in 5th and 8th grade, it's science. And that gives us information about are students making progress towards the state standards? And it's a bigger picture. So NSCAS is more summative. It's a summary of the learning at the end of the year. MAP is used to tell us where is each student at in that learning progression, and then where might be areas where we can extend their learning, where are areas that we maybe need to provide a little bit more support, or how can we better serve each student individually and groups of students to move their learning forward as much as possible within the school year and the time that we have during that school year.
And those are it. That's all of the.
Well, there's classroom-based, there's classroom assessments, of course. I would say probably teachers are assessing their students informally, formatively gathering information. I would guess every 30 seconds to 3 to 4 minutes, because whenever we're gathering information from students, when they're talking with their peers, when they are having a classroom discussion, when they're working a problem on their desk or on a whiteboard or something like that, we can gather information and move through that learning process to better meet their needs. So I include that in assessment as well. It's not formal. It's not an event, if you will, but it's certainly assessment, and it makes us better as educators. And it gives students a much broader opportunity to learn more and to make the most of the learning while they're at school.
You touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the different tests that we give district-wide, but I'd like you to talk about it a little bit more. I think there's a perspective sometimes that especially those standardized tests are serving an institutional purpose rather than a purpose for the individual student. And so, we hear like, oh, well, the only reason they're taking that is so we can see how the district ranks against other districts in the state, or they're only doing it to compare schools within the district or whatever. And sometimes I don't think people always see that more individualized perspective that testing provides. So maybe you could talk about what some practical applications look like for those individual test results.
And that's always tricky because the purpose behind the test matters, right? The why. So our state test is written at a broad level to help us understand our students mastering the standards. We cannot assess every reading standard or every math standard, so we can't assess all of the standards. So it narrows it down, but it broadly helps us understand our students making progress towards those grade level standards at grade level, which is different than MAP, which is adaptive outside of grade level. It can help give us some insight into, is a student struggling, right? Is there struggle? And sometimes as teachers, we say, well, we just know, and we do. And then we can put data in to help us better understand, what do we really know? Are there certain standards that they're struggling with? Is there a certain strand of standards in math? Is it number sense or is it algebra, right? So we can better understand what's happening inside of the student's brain and kind of where maybe some of the pitfalls are, because I don't want to be able to read a student's mind for many reasons, but the assessments can give us some insights into how their brain is working so that we can better understand and know how to support them.
Angie, I'm wondering about how parents could be an important participant in helping their student with the testing. Are there things that parents should do to prepare? Are there questions that parents should be asking so that they understand? How do we involve parents in the testing process?
I would say that whenever I'm asked, how can I help my student prepare for the test, is be engaged in the learning all year long. What we do day in and day out, that is the preparation for the test, because the test is, yes, we get a score and it tells us a grade level, or it tells us, are they proficient or not proficient? And those are important things. But really, the information is there to give us an indicator and a picture. It's not the whole photo album, but it's a picture, a snapshot of where they were on that day in that moment and time. And so, but when you start to put those photos together, it gives you a better picture of what that journey looks like. So when I think about parents, I say engagement in the learning process all year long. That's what's going to best prepare kids. When you get the scores back, I think it's important to ask questions about, what does this mean? What is this telling me? And to remember to think about it and look at it over time. When I get assessment results back for my son and I look at them, I go back and say, okay, but what were those results before? What's the pattern? And if overall the pattern is he's doing well, and this score is a little bit lower, I think to myself, I should pay attention to that for next time. Or if it's in reading, I should listen to him read and see how that's going. Or I should maybe email his teacher or call his teacher and say, I noticed this score was lower. Do you have any other information that tells you I should be concerned about this?
So in that case, how do parents partner with our schools to better understand the test scores that they're getting? Or if they have concern about test scores, what would be a good next step?
So one of the things that we do is we share, and we're talking a lot about standardized tests, right? MAP and NSCAS. We do share those scores at parent-teacher conferences specifically. And I feel like it kind of depends on what the results are of how much time is spent there. If there's not a concern, there's probably less time spent there than if there is a concern. So that makes a difference. That's more individualized. And then just looking at it over time, the good thing about our reports is it gives you more than one data point so you can see it in context, right? So that's helpful. So if you don't save those papers, Christopher, it's okay because you'll have some of that context. It also gives you context of district average and national average so that you can see, how is my student performing compared to others? Not because it's like a contest and I need to be best, but because context with data matters.
Well, it just sounds like everything you're saying, we're not really testing to evaluate performance as much as we are about helping kids get better if they need to. Is that right?
Yes. And I would say every child can and deserves to grow every year. And it doesn't matter where their results are. If my child is doing really well in school, they deserve to learn and grow too at school, right? And so it gives us insights of where might we be able to push them forward and propel their learning forward even more. Or if there is a struggle spot, how can we build those skills so that they aren't struggling as much and can improve and do better over time? So it's about helping every child, not just the struggling learner, right? And I think sometimes when we think about assessment results, we think if there's a problem, then we do something. And really, we're working on this information helps me know how to plan my instruction, how to put students in pairs and groups so that they can propel learning forward together, right? So we can be really strategic with the information.
We're coming up to the end of our time together. And so we have one last question that we would like to hear from you on. What gives you hope about assessment becoming more individualized, more personalized, and more meaningful for every child?
I think what gives me the most hope is that the conversations that teachers are having around data that comes from assessment are more meaningful and that they're planned and intentional. And when teachers are having conversations around that and then taking that conversation back to their classrooms to help students understand where they are in the learning process and empowering students, that's what is giving me hope. Is teachers are really becoming more and more savvy and intentional about how can I use this information to propel learning forward for all of my students.
Thank you, Angie, for joining us today for this informative conversation. And thank you, listener at home, for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit us online at plcschools.org/Mindshift for more content related to this episode and all of our episodes. And be sure to join us next week when we'll be talking about another exciting topic.